I'm Stephen Downey, and you are very welcome to episode 45 of the Mindful Living Guide. This week, I'm very honoured to have a guest on who I met just before Christmas at an event where he was sharing his story, and he's such a powerful storyteller. I was swept along on the journey of resilience and determination and not giving up and just embracing our own journey. So I am delighted to get to sit down and chat today to Brian Downs, a fabulous speaker and an adventurer, and I think you'll get a lot from this episode. Brian has some amazing advice to give, and just that ability to just share that common community spirit as well. We speak about an old Irish tradition called Meitheal, and I think you'll get a lot from it. So listen, sit back and enjoy this week's episode of the Mindful Living Guide. You are so welcome to this episode of the Mindful Living Guide, and I am so excited to have this guest on today. I saw our guest speaking just before Christmas, and I was blown away by their storytelling, their resilience, their just ability to bring people on a journey. And I think that we'll learn an awful lot from our guest today. Our guest is Brian Downs. He's a solo entrepreneur with over 25 years experience in leadership and development, and he's passionate about helping leaders create an environment that improves both their lives of people in work and in their own life. Brian describes himself as someone who has pushed himself physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, sometimes winning, sometimes losing, but always learning. Brian Downs, you are so welcome to the Mindful Living Guide.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
Listen, let's go back. You're speaking the area of resilience and leadership and that, but that wasn't always your journey. Am I right? You started out in training to be in accountancy.
Yes. So when I was in school, in all honesty, I didn't really know what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
right? And what I didn't know then, but I know now, is that I have ADHD.
Right.
So very smart, but just a little bit all over the place is the best way for me to describe it. So I studied accountancy on my mother's encouragement. I didn't enjoy it. I knew as I was doing it that I didn't want to do this, and I never worked as an accountant. Um, it's a good grounding for business for sure, and it helped along the way for sure. But just the idea of being an accountant never appealed to me. Um, and I went off in many different directions over the
What
years and did lots of different things.
was there a day when you realized this is not the life I want to lead, and that you decided, right, the hell with this, I'm doing my own thing?
Um, I don't know if I could pinpoint a day,
Hmm.
but you know, I always wanted to knew I always knew I wanted to work for myself in some capacity. I mean, I
Yeah.
I had my first business at 18, very small, and while I was a student, um, and I think I've always been kind of drawn to doing different things and do multiple things at the same time, I guess, and I suppose that's part of my ADHD brain.
Hmm.
Um, but I knew while I was a student that I wasn't going to be an accountant. Um, so when I did leave college, I don't know if I said this in the talk that day, but when I was a student, if you'd asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, my answer was very simple: I want to be a millionaire. Never thought about how or why or anything like that. But that's what I wanted to do, and so I was kind of behaving as if money was probably the most important value. I quickly learned it wasn't. Well, actually, maybe not that quickly, but quickly enough, I learned that it wasn't the most important thing, at least for me. But when I came out, I went to Australia to play hockey, and got a job while I was there with Zurich Insurance. Uh, I was a corporate account manager. It's a sales type job, relationship job, which I actually really, really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Um, and when I came home, I came home after about a year and a half, came back to Ireland. Uh, I got a job again in the account management arena with a company called Excel Logistics, who were an enormous company at the time. I think something in the region of 170,000 employees. Since has been bought by DHL, and
Mm,
they merged. They became DHL. Excel became DHL, and then I moved on to another company in the same industry, a company called Expeditors, who again would have been one of the big companies worldwide. And I was a global account manager for them. And that was the last corporate job that I had, because then I went into business with some people. Um, and we grew a fairly sizable business, but I got to do a lot of different things. So I was the commercial director in that organization, and yeah, we had multiple interests.
mm,
Um, but that's where I learned that money wasn't my most important value. Uh, don't get me wrong, I love making money,
yeah.
but I figured that actually people were far more important. And uh, after kind of, I guess, about 6.5 years, I walked away from that business.
Mm,
Um, but I'd already started to retrain. So I'd studied coaching in neurolinguistics, and I got interested in behavioral science and psychology. Uh, I, I qualified as a hypnotherapist even at one stage, not because I wanted to be a hypnotherapist,
yeah.
or a therapist of any kind, but just because I was interested in it, and
Yeah.
and it gave a little slightly different insight into how the mind works.
Mm,
Um, but I started out my own in 2011-ish, uh, and it was a rocky first year. I think my first year I generated about 8 grand in revenue. Um, but I've been going at it since, and it's grown, and I've collaborated with lots of different and interesting people, and one in particular, a guy called John McNamara. We have a business called Performance Nerds,
brilliant.
who would have a fairly similar outlook to me, or philosophy, as it were.
Sounds like a deep understanding because all like all the neurolinguistics, the NLP, that you have a deep understanding of how people think and how people approach.
I I guess I do. I'm always
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah.
I think it goes well with a kind of a natural interest in people, and a natural empathy. Um, I'm pretty good at understanding people, and meeting them where they are, as it were. Um, but yeah, I look, it's a never ending learning journey. You
Yeah.
just keep pushing on and reading new books and listening to
Mm,
podcasts, and learning now is so much easier than it
yeah.
used to be 20 years ago, because there's so much information out there, and there's lots of people like yourself bringing podcasts that are learning opportunities, loads of really really good books. So that's how I do a lot of my learning, obviously.
And you've also got you've a background in at the same time in a venture in discovery in I know you've done not only a ultramarathon but ultramarathon on a mountain as well. Was that right?
I've done lots of
Yeah.
different things. I've
Yeah.
I've been I've been a sports nut since I was a kid.
Yeah.
Um, and as a teenager, I was involved in lots of different sports. Hockey was the one I did well at, but also, I think one of the stories you told that day when you were
Yeah.
at that event, was about climbing Carrauntoohil, which is Ireland's highest mountain, for the first time when I was 11, and it was my dad brought me up. Um, and dad had a huge interest in the outdoors. He's been in the Scouts since he was 10 years old.
Mm,
He's 73 now. Um, and that that was a real catalyst for me, not just in kind of experiencing that adventure, but in how dad kind of led me along the way, and pushed me and challenged me. But he was there supporting the whole time.
yeah.
And I've been up that mountain hundreds of times. I've run it, I've hiked it, I've brought people up, and that informed a lot of how I chose to look at life in general,
Mm,
and looking at adventure in different ways, I guess. So yes, these physical adventures very important to me, in pushing my body and pushing myself. Has always been important, and I've run all sorts of things and climbed lots of big mountains. And I mean, this time last year I was in Mongolia,
wow.
crossing 100 miles of frozen lake, which was epic. I mean,
Wow.
if anybody ever gets the chance to go to Mongolia, go. Trust me, you won't regret it. It's an amazing place.
But
But then
what
look. Sorry, go ahead,
No,
Stephen.
no, I was going to say one thing I really got from when you were talking actually about that experience with your dad, and one thing that will always sit with me is that it seemed like he was helping you, but he wasn't directing you, and
No.
that he was allowing you to fail,
Yes.
and keep going. And I thought that was such an important step that there's so many people that they try to direct people in certain ways, but they're afraid to let someone fail. Um,
Failure is part of the process of any success you'll have. You know, I'm not afraid of failing. Don't be wrong, I don't like it and it hurts sometimes. And but it is an opportunity to say, okay, I've learned something here. Do I want to have another go? And if I do, how am I going to do it differently? And I think we can all do that in various ways. I guess that's part of that emotional adventure that I would talk about as well
yeah.
in terms of examining ourselves and saying, okay, I've done this. I gave it
Mm.
100%. Now, can I give it 100% in a different way? Do I want to? Um, and asking ourselves those questions, that reflection is really, really important, at least as I see the world, because we learn an awful lot about ourselves. Um, and I think you're right. I think a lot of people are reluctant to do that, or you know, where we do kind of protect people from failure to an extent, and I think I genuinely think that's the wrong thing to do. I think it's important to learn to fail, especially when we're young.
I'm noticing that a lot in even just like I've young kids like and them being involved in GA and in athletics, and there's a big focus on everybody winning and everyone having a sense of pride. And I think that while that is important, I think like exactly what you're saying though. We have to teach people that it's okay to fail, that failure is part of the process. It's like I was saying in the introduction that it's like you're sometimes losing, but you're always learning. As from what you said in the past as well.
Yeah, look, I think this idea of participation medals is an awful idea.
Mhm.
Um, I think you can certainly help kids to find pride in their performance even when you lose.
Yeah.
But life is a series of winning and losing, and we can learn so much from losing. I'm talking in the sporting arena
Yeah.
specifically now.
Yeah.
We can learn so much from losses that when we protect people from it, I worry that we're not learning enough. That we're not building that resilience and that emotional flexibility that we can apply in other areas of life. Personally, I've taken so much from sport over the years and learned so much. Had some tough experiences, had some amazing experiences, um, but it was always, there's a win and loss situation,
Mhm.
and that's true of everything we'll ever do. There will be a win and loss situation, so we need to learn and understand that it's okay to lose. And if you lose having done your best, there's a lot of pride you can take from that. But there's also a lot of learning. Okay, that was my best. Now, how can I improve? Uh, uh, how can I improve my performance so that I can do better next time? And this is true even of, you know, mature leaders in any business that,
Mhm.
and I think, very often they're very good at this, at that reflection of looking at, okay, here are the circumstances, the performance isn't what we wanted it to be. Okay, how can we make it better?
Mhm.
What can we do? What tweaks can we make? And very often it's just that, it's just tweaks.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily mean a huge transformation, a huge reorganization or whatever. A lot of the time it's just tweaks.
I think probably that's what a lot of leaders would fear as well, is that when someone comes in to help them, that they're going to make massive transformational changes that will be uncomfortable. But it's really, isn't it about that? It's about that tweaking, just keeping slightly outside your comfort zone, but still pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. Because if you try to make those transformational changes all in one go, it's not going to work, because you're going to be so discombobulated really that it's too hard.
Yeah, sure. I think the value of somebody like me is an objective view, and there's
Mhm.
there's plenty of people like me out there.
Yeah.
I don't claim to be unique or anything like that, but it's that objective view, and it's that ability to ask tough questions to give somebody
Mhm.
something to reflect on,
Yeah.
that they may not have considered before. Uh, so there's a lot of value in that,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of the time people from the outside can see things that you can't see yourself.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, it can be useful, and you know what, from my perspective, it can be a lot of fun as well.
Yep.
To see somebody maybe have that aha moment, or to see somebody push back and really get into a tough conversation. I love
Yeah.
that. A bit of to and fro.
Challenge themselves. The
Mm.
one thing I wanted to chat to you a lot about as well is because I know and I said in introduction as well is that you have put yourself in not only physically, not emotionally, but spiritually. Um, can you talk a bit more about the spirituality side of yourself and what that means to you?
Sure. Um, Again, it's an ongoing process, Stephen. Um, so it, as I said to you earlier, I have ADHD, but I also have a severe anxiety disorder,
Mhm.
and that is an emotional challenge, an emotional adventure, I suppose, in many senses. But
Yeah.
um, going through therapy, which again I'd recommend for everybody. Therapy is amazing. If you can, you should. Um, has kind of pushed me to look at things differently. Now, I'm not religious in any way. When I speak about spiritual adventure, I really mean exploring myself and maybe the bigger questions, and you know what do I believe? Uh, how do I exist in the world? How do I create my own world? Um, and looking at that through different lenses, I guess is the best way to put it. Um, I have a partner who is involved in mindfulness and well-being, and she's very developed in her spiritual sense, far more than I. Um, but we get to talk about these things, and I think about death and what that means, and what does living mean. And again, as you'll know, it's a very personal thing, right?
Yes,
That
of
that
course.
that kind of spiritual journey is a very personal thing, and people have their own takes on it, and
Yeah.
that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But I think it's important to address these things.
To
Um,
reflect
it,
on what we think about the world, all right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it has certainly helped me manage my anxiety
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, I went through a period where I was having panic attacks almost every day, um, and that was very very challenging emotionally.
Mhm.
Um, I would not have been a religious or a spiritual person at all.
Yeah.
Um, to me, at that point, it was very woo,
Yeah.
if you forgive the term.
No, I've
Um,
used that term many times on the podcast. Yeah.
but the first panic attack I had, I was on my own in the office with nobody there,
Mm.
and I really didn't know what was happening. I thought, geez, am I having a heart attack here? Um, Long story short, I got myself to the hospital, which wasn't too far away,
Yeah.
and brought into the triage room. There was a doctor and a nurse. I will never forget this nurse. I never got her name.
Mm.
The thing I remember most is her eyes, and
Right.
she was amazing, and she talked me down essentially.
Yeah.
Um, but before I left, she said to me, um, she asked for us to, did I have a stressful job, and I told her what I did, and it probably was quite stressful. Um, and she said, "Have you ever heard of mindfulness? Do you know what mindfulness is?"
Yeah.
And I said, I did, but I said, no, no, no. She kind of gave me a brief explanation, and in my head, I was going,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, forget it. Not going. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I walked out the door of the hospital, committing to myself that I was never going to tell anybody about this. I was never going to tell anybody about the panic attack or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then they started happening more for kind of 2 years.
Okay.
That was happening without me telling anybody.
Yeah.
And I eventually went to my doctor, and he was amazing, and he sent me to a psychotherapist
Mhm.
at my request.
Yeah.
And she was a godsend.
Brilliant.
But
Yeah.
it started me to think more about, and particularly mindfulness, and how
Yeah.
I do things. Um, and running became a really important mindfulness activity for me. But there was also something else that I'd done for years that my grandmother's kind of got me involved in. That was cooking. I
Wow.
love cooking.
Yeah.
I love to cook, and I love to cook for other people.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm not a fancy cook or anything like that,
Yeah.
but I think I can cook food that people like and it tastes good. So
Yeah.
that became something more mindful for me, and still is. And
Wow.
spending time in the mountains became a very mindful activity for me because I've done
Yeah.
a lot of it on my own.
What I absolutely love about this podcast and by bringing people on this podcast is that every now and again someone says something that I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that, and
Mm.
like what you're mentioning about cooking, and that it's another activity that you can literally just be so present in
Hmm.
and just get so involved in, and that's the beauty, I think, and one of the reasons why I do this podcast is because so many people think of mindfulness as one specific thing,
No.
and I think and what you've just proved there is that it's about bringing your own take on, right, what does it mean to be fully present for me, and what kind of task can I do? And as you were there was so many reminders when you were talking there about your introduction to when she mentioned mindfulness. I actually had extremely similar situation where I had a severe panic attack, actually thinking I was having a stroke, ended up in an ambulance in a hospital, and the doctor actually said to me, you're stressed.
Hmm.
And that's how I ended up literally looking up mindfulness courses that night, and then so that I didn't realize that the similarity in the journey. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
I've heard this story so many times, Stephen. So,
Yeah.
we're not alone.
Yeah, no, there's many
So
people out
many,
there.
so
Yeah.
many people doing it. What's his name? The radio DJ Dermot Whelan is
Yeah,
doing his
yeah, I remember him.
mindful.
Yeah,
I mean, similar story.
yeah,
He was on the side of the road and
yeah.
had a panic attack, and
On the way to an event, I think it was. Yeah,
that's
yeah,
right. I think it was the Cat Laughs in Kilkenny,
yeah.
and
That was it.
but it's a common story, and
Yeah,
it's that kind of intense fear that,
yeah,
oh my God, I'm going to die, and that's what it is.
hmm,
That's the essence of a panic attack.
yeah,
Um, Certainly triggers some change. Now, it took me a little while to get there
yeah.
and to
But
make that decision to
but
go down
that's
that
such
road.
an
But
important part though as well. Is that like if someone said, right, you need to do X, X is Y, and you should be doing this, and you should be doing that. That I don't think that is the way to do it. It like even if it takes a while to get to it,
mm,
it's very important that it's on your own terms and
well,
you're embracing it in a way that suits you.
yes, for sure. And what I think, my ultra competitive nature and stubbornness was there to know I can beat this myself. I can beat this
Yeah,
myself. I'm going to be fine. Look, it's fine. I
yeah,
don't need to tell anybody. I keep it to myself. And there was a degree of shame to that too.
hmm,
I had a panic attack, and it was anxiety, and that's weak, and all
yeah,
that other kind of shite that some people spout out. It's not,
yeah,
you know. But I was in that was where my headspace was at the time.
yeah.
And when I do remember particular day when I made the decision to go see my doctor. You
Hmm.
know, it was a Wednesday morning. I said, no, I'm done. I've got to go see my doctor. And I got in my car and I
Yeah,
drove to his office. I had no appointment.
yeah,
I had a good relationship with my GP. And yeah, I sat down and told him what was going on, and he was amazing,
brilliant.
amazing. Yeah, I couldn't have asked for better. In fairness, he completely got it. Um, I did let medication for a little while, for
Yeah,
I think about 6 months. But the deal I struck with him was that, okay, I'll do minimum dose, minimum term, and you have to recommend a talk therapist for me. He said, "Grand, no problem, let's do that." And it was a huge help.
and it's amazing, and I think it's important to talk about that for anybody that it's different to different people, that different things will work for different people as well. But I think one thing that is amazing on most people's journey is talking and just it's I think it's like you were saying, and there's so many men in the same exact same situation that they feel like they if something like that happens to them, it's something they can't share and can't talk about. But it's like I know from my own journey that it wasn't until I actually was chatting to a therapist and actually talking out loud about this is how I feel, this is how I've been approaching things, that it was like a freedom
Mhm.
that to actually get that off your chest. It's thanks for sharing that. It's actually amazing.
One of the things I love to do is take people into the mountains,
Yeah, yeah,
or just out in nature, and into the mountains, because and especially people who haven't done it before, or haven't done much of it before,
yeah,
because you see, over the course of a 5 or 6 hour hike, the barriers come down.
yeah,
It's just being, I think it's just being in nature, and I talked about my awe at the mountains that first time I went to Carrauntoohil, and I see that in other people when if I if I take people up, and when the barriers drop, people just start to talk, and you hear their stories, and they talk to each other, and it's one of the wonderful things about getting out there, and getting out for a hike.
hmm,
Just the chats, and meeting people, and with performance nerds, we actually particularly in the summertime, so we probably start again in April or May. We do a monthly Meitheal, we call it a Meitheal hike. So Meitheal is an Irish word.
And it's something I
Water
have on my
trekking.
list of things I want to talk to you about because that was one of the transformational things about your talk. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Talk
yeah.
about Mel.
But it just brings business people together, and people who it's an open invitation. We put it out on LinkedIn, but we've brought groups together, loads of groups together sometimes in the East Coast, sometimes out west, and just the talk. We tend to limit it to kind of a 2.5 to 3 hour hike,
Mhm.
but just the chats that happen and the connections that happen, and it's lovely to see it, and it's lovely to be able to facilitate something like that.
Can you give a bit of background actually about the word metal and where it comes from? Because I think this is
Sure.
fascinating. For people, because this podcast goes out to, there's a fair bit in the UK and in Europe and stuff that mightn't actually understand the term.
It's an Irish word. Its origins, as far as I can research it, back in the 1700s. And its literal translation is cooperative or work team. Now, how this used to manifest itself is, um, particularly in the farming communities, where in that time it was a lot about survival. And it was the idea of helping each other out. So you could have to simplify, you could have neighboring farms, and you have Farmer Mary and Farmer John. So Farmer Mary farmed potatoes, Farmer John was a dairy farmer, and he might have been cutting silage. And they'd have some labor intensive periods over the course of their year. So for Mary it was planting, and then harvesting her crop, and for John it might have been cutting silage and calving, let's say. What would happen is that, let's say, Mary's harvesting her potato crop. Well, John and his family would all head up to Mary's farm, and these may have been very small farms, bearing in mind that. But and if they had some neighbours or other people from the community, they'd form what was called a meitheal, and they'd all go up to Mary's farm and they'd help. They'd get stuck in. They'd be pulling up potatoes and stacking them and all of the rest, and they'd do that every day until the job was done. They didn't do it to get paid, because they wouldn't get paid. But what they would get is, they get cups of tea, and they get
Hearty
fed a
dinner.
bit.
Yeah.
They get fed a bit, as much as circumstances would allow at the time. But when the job was done, they'd have a little celebration, right? So there might be a bottle of whiskey, there could be some
Mm.
music and a bit of dancing, and there might have been some bottles of stout, whatever it
Yeah.
was, right? Whatever they could afford. But it would be marked by a bit of a celebration. And um, and then when John would have his period of intensity, well, the favor would be returned, and everybody kind of helped each other out. Um, I use this concept as part of a team development framework that I designed, and it's a cheesy acronym, Stephen. It's of team. It's trust, engagement, alignment, and Meitheal. And Meitheal for me is something that's, I think, very valuable, or could be very valuable in business. It's this idea of helping each other out, because
Mm.
very often I see dysfunctional teams, and a lot of the reason for that dysfunction is that people are operating their own agendas. They might not have clarity on what their role is, and they tend not to help each other out, or at least not enough, or collaborate very well. And introducing this spirit of Mehel can certainly help that. And it puts a requirement on people to actually get involved a bit, and obviously there's a process behind it. But that's how I use Mehel. But use it in different contexts, and obviously with the Mehel hikes, with the performance nerds, that's again, it's bringing people together. And for me, that's what it's about. And on those hikes, people will help each other out. They'll talk about their business or an issue they might be having, and there could be 10 or 20 people that they could get opinions from. And I love that idea of people talking and sharing maybe a problem or a challenge or an idea, and getting some feedback or some again, a bit of a to and fro conversation on it.
And thinking of a situation in a way they never thought before, or talking to people that are getting feedback from people that they'd never have got feedback from. So it's a totally different
Yeah.
perspective.
And it's that objective view, right?
Yeah.
It's people looking at the problem from a completely different perspective,
Mm.
looking from the outside in. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. But and then when you have a team, it's looking at themselves and how they interact, how they collaborate, how they work together, how they communicate. And there's a couple of processes behind that then to help them do that better.
Wow. Brian, if I take you back, actually, we were talking earlier actually just about mindfulness and your partner's kind of interest in mindfulness
Mm,
as well. Um, if you don't mind, I kind of to steer the conversation more to like towards mindful living, and it's
sure.
something I ask all people on the podcast, and like I was alluding to earlier, it's because I love people taking ownership of their own mindful journey.
Mhm.
So if I ask the question, what does mindful living mean to you? What does it mean in your world?
To me, it means being aware of what I'm doing and who I'm doing it with. Being aware of how I'm behaving in that space and with those people. Um, we hear the word being present. I suppose that's important because when we are there, all of us, mind, body, spirit, um, we can interact better. We can take a lot more from it. We can relax a lot more because our mind isn't in five different places while our body is here doing this. We can relate to people better. I mean, take the talk that you were at. I try to be very mindful and present when I'm doing those because I have to be. I want to be aware of what's going on in an audience
Mm.
and looking for reactions and in terms of how people are receiving it, and then being able to handle some questions afterwards. So, uh, yeah, I suppose to me it is being there, all of me being there.
Oh wow. The and like you were mentioned there about your mind going to different places, and I'm sure
Mm.
actually do you mind me asking actually when you obviously have been diagnosed with ADHD,
Mhm.
and that's not something you knew when you were younger, is it? That was something when you found
No,
out
I
when you
did.
were
I didn't
older.
know. I only found out about 2.5 years ago.
Wow. And
Um, I always knew it was a bit different, though.
yeah, I was going to say, like, there's probably a lot of adults out there in that situation where they
Mm.
have that race in mind. They have, and it is possibly ADHD, but they've never realized. Is there any tips you'd give to anybody who's in a kind of a similar type of situation?
Um, a couple of things I want to say in this. So the way my ADHD brain works, and the best way I
Mm,
can describe it is, it's like having three or four browser windows open inside my head, and in each window there's maybe 40 or 50 tabs open, right? And they're all running at the same time. Now I'm not consciously aware of them all running
mm,
at the same time,
yeah,
but but I have this ability that I can put stuff into my head, let it percolate, as I call it. It might be an idea or a problem,
mhm,
and something will come to me eventually about it. Um, there's a lot of positives to ADHD. That there's a lot of uh, I don't want to use the word gifts. There's a lot
yeah,
of positive attributes to it, but there's
mhm,
also a lot of negative, right? What can happen at times is all of those browser windows and tabs all come at the same time in flood, and it can become very overwhelming. Um, Now, what I say to people is, if you think you have ADHD, behave as if you do, and
mhm,
research it. Getting a diagnosis can be hard because there's a shortage of professionals to do that. It's expensive. So if you think you do, well, then start behaving that way and start to understand how your ADHD works, right? How your brain, your unique brain works. A lot of us will have similarities, but there's also some quirks as well that will be personal to us. Um, if you also have anxiety or depression that goes with it, start doing things to help that. Um, you know, again, not everybody is fortunate enough to be able to access therapists. I was very lucky; I could afford to do that, and I'm acutely aware that there's many people out there that are struggling, whether it's ADHD or autism or Asperger's or anxiety or depression or bipolar, any of these things that can't. Right, so there's loads and loads of information online, loads of good organizations around ADHD that put out really good information. Um, but I think start doing things to help yourself also. So for me, running was a huge help. The mountains have always been a huge help. Cooking was a huge help. Writing is a huge help. Music is a really important thing for me. Um, but I think the most important thing for me is exercise. I've
yeah,
got to exercise. I've got to train every day, and you know that's hugely beneficial to anxiety, to depression, and also to ADHD. And it's not a case of you got to go out and run ultramarathons. You got to go. The best place to start is go out and
Yeah.
walk for half an hour
Yeah.
every day. Get
Absolutely.
outside.
Yeah.
Get outside. If you can get anywhere near some trees and or mountains, do that. If you can't, don't worry. Get out and get half an hour's exercise every day. You'll start to feel better, right? Now, obviously, if it's very acute and it's having a major impact on your life, go see a GP, talk to a
Absolutely.
medical
Yeah.
professional. Absolutely. But get out there and walk. Get out, as I said, you don't have to run. If you've got a bike, get out on the bike, get the heart rate up a bit, and burn off that excess adrenaline that does an awful lot to drive anxiety. One other thing I think is very important as well is become aware of food triggers,
Okay.
right?
Oh,
Caffeine, I'm caffeine sensitive,
right.
right? I no longer I no longer consume caffeine in any form
Yeah.
or any stimulant. Um, Sugar is a big one. I'm not so good on that. I'm getting better, but I'm not so good on that one yet. Gluten was a big one for me. I'm
Yeah.
not a celiac, but I do have an intolerance of some description. When I stopped eating gluten, I felt better.
Wow.
You know, so but I think
Yeah.
food and our lifestyles play a major part in this. One other thing that I'd say is become aware of toxic relationships or people who drain you. And while it's not always possible to eliminate those relationships, we can minimize them to a large extent. And I think that's a really positive thing to do for yourself.
Absolutely. And I think that's amazing advice. And like you said, it's everybody's journey is going to be different, and hopefully something in there might help someone. But and I've always said as well, the first thing is just talk to people, just get out there and talk. But exercising, like you said, it doesn't have to be an ultramarathon. Just get out and
No,
walk. Just get out there
just
and
get
walk. You know,
half an hour. That's
yeah,
it. Half
that's
an
it.
hour. Get the heart rate up a bit.
Uh,
Start
listen,
to notice what's going on around you.
I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and I'm sure that many of the people listening will be interested in the likes of the performance nerds, metal hike, or so even getting you into talk maybe in their own company. If people want to contact you, Brian, what's the best way to get out and contact you?
LinkedIn is a good place to find me.
Yeah,
My website is briandowns.com.
yeah,
I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. I'm not that often on Twitter. And the Performance Nerds website is performancenerds.com. So any
performance
of
nerds.
those is good
Brilliant.
are all good places to find me.
And as always, I have a show notes page, and I'll stick all those links as well. So if anyone's looking to contact you, they will. But listen, Brian, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and just getting to know you and just your journey. It's been amazing. I know that a lot of people will get a lot from your honesty and just your encouragement just to just get out there
Mhm.
and do things. But listen, Brian Downs, thank you so much for being on the Mindful Living Guide.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So there you have our episode with Brian. Listen, I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you got a lot from it. As always, when we talk about our own journeys, we have to obviously put a caveat as this is what worked for us, and this everybody's journey is very different. So the advice is always to seek professional help and talk. And like Brian said, just get out that door, get exercise. If you listen to the podcast every week, why not just get out there and just walk and enjoy both at the same time? So listen, thank you for, as always, sharing your time. I really appreciate people listening to the podcast and the feedback we get each week. If you know anyone can benefit from, please just share. Word of mouth is so important. And actually, while we're talking about word of mouth, if you're listening to this on Spotify, you may notice a question, what do you think of this episode? If you click reply, you can leave a review of the episode. I'd really appreciate that. Just get some feedback on what you guys are thinking of the episode so far. And if there's anything that you think we should add or change, really appreciate the feedback. So listen, I've been Stephen Downey, and you've been listening to the Mindful Living Guide.